Right. This is my talk named "The Substance of Environment Art: The Obvious and Not So Obvious Subjects of Environment Art." So, who am I? I am Erik. You can find me on ArtStation and LinkedIn. And I studied here 2014 to 17. And I started here thinking I was going to be a concept artist doing 2D paintings. I then switched to 3D. This is the last thing I drew. Never finished it, which is this is basically what happened to all my drawings. So yeah, I switched to 3D. I got inspired by photogrammetry and Battlefront environment. It came out in 2015, I think, just when I started the 3D courses here. But I've made some levels that young in Age of Empires and in Half-Life in the old Hammer engine. And I also tried doing some Witcher 2 engine things, but I didn't know 3D back then, so didn't turn out too great. I started working on at the Outsiders as an environment artist. At the time, I've been unemployed for a few months, and I worked on my portfolio, started applying, and I got it in about a month after I started applying. I was ashamed of my portfolio at the time, but apparently it was good enough. It was, however, pretty specific. It was very specified towards environment art, and that was the fact that actually got me the job. That I didn't have a too broad general environment, because they really looked for an environment artist. So before, it was pretty common to start as an environment artist at your first job. Usually you did prop artist for a few years before you were even allowed to move in as an environment artist. But now the games are getting bigger, and we have more specific roles within the game industry right now. I love history, and I'm a sucker for Viking stuff. So it was really good to start. I was lucky to start working on a game which is called Darkborn, which is about Vikings. Have any one of you heard about it, Darkborn? A few? All right, that's good. So I just have some images from it. It's actually cancelled. So yeah, it's not going to be finished, at least not for now. But it was a good opportunity for me to try out my wings. You know, we're working on new projects now, and that's very exciting, which I can't talk about, but these things happen. So first, I would like to know some things about you, so I can adapt my talk according to what you know. So how many of you are artists? Right, it's most of you. How many of you have started with 3D yet? Yeah, it's good. How many of you are thinking about becoming an environment artist? Yeah, still some. And just a little question: how many of you are to have an understanding of PBR and normal maps and so that's good. I had no idea what that was when I started here. So the environment art role is very broad. You need to know a little about a great many things compared to other roles, which is even more specific. They know a lot about few things. It will differ depending on the company. At smaller companies, you will do a wider range of things. And at the Outsider, we're about 26 people now. We're growing, we're getting more. But stuff I do here is, I don't do concept art, but I'm involved with ordering concept art and coming up with ideas and themes for levels. I'm also doing the white boxing. It's, we have level designers, but they are sometimes they have a lot to do, and we have to do it. And sometimes we work very close together. We send the level back and forth a lot, and that's a good workflow, I think. Being involved with the actual concept of the level. Many other companies, as an environment artist, you get a level and you can't really change much. But here it's a big creative freedom, and I enjoy that. And then we plan the levels and the assets we're gonna have. We estimate, making schedules and planning how long each asset is gonna take. We model it in Maya. We doing sculpture in ZBrush, making textures, texturing models, put in engines, and dress, optimize, and lighting. So it's a lot of responsibilities, and it's both very exciting to start from the beginning to the very end, but it's also a lot of responsibilities. So when I started, I had to, grasp what environment was to know which areas I wanted to improve. So I made this. It's not perfect, it's personal, but I think it's a good way of isolating the different subjects that are very closely related to environment, or not so closely, but still they can be asset. So when you see this, you realize you will never be perfected, but you can become pretty good. So if you go back to this, we can start with the first one, and it's the most boring one, I think, but important nevertheless. It's planning. So looking up references, mood board, ordering concept arts, meetings, a lot of meetings. It's probably maybe 10% of your time is meetings and talking to people. Ownership, deciding which part you are responsible for and which you aren't, and so that nothing gets overlooked, that no one has ownership of it. And then in the last weeks you realize who's doing this, and no one has claimed it. Time estimation and scope. This is actually a skill. This is hard to master. And I think it's an indicator of seniority. We have had a lot of interviews now, and I see a trend. And it goes like the people with the most years in the industry, if you show them an asset and you want them to estimate how long this will take to make from start to finish, the people who have worked for a long time will tell you the longest. They will estimate it to a week or 2 weeks. And then you have people who are beginners, is from school, and they will estimate it to 1 or 2 days. And it's all interviews I had, it follows this pattern like exactly. The more years, the more days they estimate. And prioritizing is also important because, as I said, estimation is difficult, and you will estimate wrong, and then you need to know what to cut and not to cut. Let's see what's next. Let's talk about this one. It's nature, art, architecture, story, history, and a subject which is a bit far away, but it's traveling. Architecture, I think it's pretty straightforward actually. You need to understand the building blocks and structures. If you're doing a modular environment, references everything. It's look at buildings, look at pictures, try and understand how they actually built the thing. Architectural principles are also applies to game design. I don't remember where I read this, but it was some book about architecture, and it said a piece of asset should have two meanings, or two useful purposes. And there was an example of a pillar, and it was actually the first principle is supporting the building so it doesn't fall down. But it was actually made so people could sit around it. It was a bench too, so it had two purposes. And I think the same can be. It doesn't have to be like extremely thought out, but it could be something like you have a. We had in Darkborn, I made a decal, which was glowing runes, which told a story. So it's part of environmental storytelling. But I also put it where the player was supposed to go. So it was also navigation. So you had two purposes there. And that was something I thought about from reading about architecture. And you live in a town which, especially if you like medieval architecture, it's amazing for inspiration. History, how does history relate to environment art? Well, as an environment artist, storytelling is very important, and it's gonna go from history to story to environment storytelling. It's a great source of inspiration. And being inspired by history is not stealing; it's being inspired by. We can take an example of World of Warcraft, or any fantasy game is inspired or is based on Lord of the Rings and Tolkien. And he, in turn, it was inspired by Norse mythology. So the dwarves in Norse mythology were dwarves working inside a mountain, very good at making weapons and stuff. And all the names of the dwarves in Lord of the Rings are actually from Norse mythology. Even Gandalf is a name from Norse, from the Vikings. Game of Thrones uses a lot of reference or an inspiration from a real conflict, War of the Roses in England. So I can give you an example how this would work. There's two cultures that I'm very interested in recently, and it's the Mycenaeans and the Minoans. These are Greek cultures that existed for over 1,000 years each, and this is before the classical Greek period. It's before Sparta and Athens and all those conflicts and cultures. Both this culture collapsed. One through environmental disaster. So it's a big volcano eruption in Santorini, and most historians agree that this was the biggest cause of this culture to being extinct in a few days, basically. And then you have the Mycenaean culture, which replaced the Minoans, and they too were destroyed, but they were destroyed by invaders. So you have two cultures, and they both collapsed, but in very different ways. And how would we show this in an environment? I guess the Mycenaean would have a lot more weapons. There was a warlike culture, while the Minoans were much more peaceful. And if we're making an environment of remnants of this culture, obviously the Minoans would have a lot more walls, and and the Minoans, if you want to give an example how their destroyed cities will look like, you could put it underwater, because this big eruption actually triggered a tsunami, which destroyed nearby villages. So you can take a lot of inspiration from history, but also if you're making a fantasy game, you will want to know the history and lore of that actual game. You will talk to the creative directors, so you will know the history before you start building the environment. And the history is vast. I mean, how many of you had known about the Minoan and the Mycenaean cultures before? It's actually quite a few. It's good. Most people don't, and history is vast. And an example I just heard the other day, interesting fact that Cleopatra is actually closer in time to us than she is to the pyramids when they were created. That gives you an idea how long the Egyptian culture existed and how much history there is to explore. Nature, It's all about references. But don't just sit by a computer and look at it. You have to go outside. This is actually very important. You need to. It takes a long time to understand nature if you ever will. And nature has these rules. They are very subtle and hard to see. But the more you're studying it, the more you'll understand it. It's basic stuff like what grows where. Like if you want to build a forest, there are hundreds different types of forest you can build. But mostly it's for just go outside, look at how things react to light, look at materials, try to break it down to PBR, the PBR workflow. Like look at how roughness changes between materials. For example, like this cobblestone outside. Some are much more smooth than others. Some are more rough. That creates a very interesting reflections. Look at the shape. Try to analyze what details are micro details they would use for a normal map. What details are bigger they would use for maybe tessellation on a height map. Explore how foliage look like with subsurface scattering and reflections and so on. Look at wear and tear, aging. Again, Visby is a great reference for aging. Some pictures I took. This is from one beach in Sydney. So it's a lot of different types of rocks there in a very small space. All these are real pictures except one I made in Substance Designer. Can you see which one is fake? Now it's quite small pictures, but I'll try. No. Well, this one up here is made in Substance Designer. But I did this when I planned a level, and it's very important to actually go outside. And it's very hard to find these many reference pictures from one place. And then also think about the blendings. How does this material blend into each other? This one is much more of a gradient going on. This one is very sharp. It's almost no blending at all. It's just a few pixels. Okay, what's next? Tech. All right, so math. I would actually say that the environment role is about 50% technical. And it helped me a lot to understand that everything has a mathematical value. When I first started trying to make shaders, for example, in Unreal, I couldn't wrap my head around how can you multiply a picture by a value. But a picture is actually just values too. This picture, each pixel here have an R, a G, and a B value, red, green, and blue value. Same with X, Y, and Z. It's just values, and we can use math to manipulate them. So it helps to separate them. This color is 1.3 red, 1.5 green, and 1 blue. And you can use in Unreal component mask to separate the R, G, and a B. And then you can multiply them and append them back together and get a new color. But if you break them down and isolate them like this, it's easier to understand, I think. And this is a lerp. This is basically blending these two depending on this value. So a 111, a white color, blending with a black 000.5 becomes gray. But you don't have to use values. You can use textures. But remember, textures are also values. It's just separated in pixels. So each pixel has a value between 0 and 1. Can grab another example here. Is Sinewave. this is a useful thing for making something shift in color. You can make a light go on and off. If you add time to it, it will actually start blinking, and you connect it to color. So if we do this here, this one will start going from black to white. The problem here is it goes positive up. It goes from 0, black, to 1, white, and then go back, and it goes negative. And negative, everything under 0 is black. We can't get darker than black. So we have something that's go from black to white and then goes to black for a very long time. We can still manipulate this. First thing I did was try to add 1. So we shift the whole. -1 plus 1 is 0, and then +1 plus 1 is 2. So we get this, we shift this whole line up. But then we have something that's whiter than white. That's okay for emissive, if you want something to glow. But let's say we just want it to go from 0 to 1. That's also easy to do. We can just take the Sine Node, divide it by 2, and then add 0.5. So dividing -1 by 2 is -0.5. Dividing +1 by 2 is +1.5. And then we just add 1.5. We get this Sine Node between the values we actually want by very simple math. I'm going to show you a example how that looks like. So, okay, you can't see the whole. Hold on. Tech is not working with me here. Ironic, since we're talking about technical stuff here. Well, I guess I can show the clip afterwards. But you can also manipulate the X, Y, and Z, so to change the world position. And then again, we break down the components, and in the blue channel, which is up, we multiply by 20. Then the model you have is going to go up and down. If we just multiply everything, it's going to go up and down and both sideways at the same time. But if we isolate this value, we can manipulate only that one. Let's see. All right, so back to this one. Yeah, I used to hate math, but now I think it's really cool. I think I look like this guy when I do math. I guess the programmers think I look like a child, counting apples and oranges, but yeah, doesn't matter. It gets the job done. And then you move into more advanced stuff, but if you break everything down, it doesn't have to be that advanced. Like if you categorize everything, it's just basically what I did before at the same level, but a lot more of it. I made this one to make a triplanal projection for a mountain I built. So the textures that are tiling project from all directions, so you don't get stretching. Here's some normals of it. All right, more tech stuff. Each individual program is gonna have its own challenges. Or each engine is going to be different. They all have much in common, but it's going to take some time to learn. And unfortunately, you have to use a lot of programs as an environment artist. Then it's lighting. You have to, it's a lot of theory about baking, ray tracing, real time, and post effects. And then it's also the artistic aspect of lighting a scene. Most of the time you will have a lighting artist, but at smaller companies you will have to do it yourself. Profiling performance, this is also something the tech team will take care of, but you will have to be aware of it. You have to know the cost for each material or asset you make, so you don't slow down the whole game. Effects, I put this in, it's good to know about effects because you're going to order effects. You're going to plan what effects you want for your level. But most of the time this is a very specific role because it's very difficult to do. Scripting can be part of it too. So programs, there's a lot of programs out there. I would say, for me, this is the core I use. This is Maya. Move it into ZBrush, sculpt it, bake it down, and then texture it in Substance Painter. And then I use these programs for building mountains and worlds. I would recommend, if you aim to become an environment art, at something that's not for mobile, that you learn ZBrush. It's an important part of the low poly, high poly workflow. You shouldn't get. I think you shouldn't get scared by the amount of programs, because it can actually give you an advantage if you're new and you compete with someone who's been in the industry for 6 years, 10 years. They might not have had the time to learn the newest programs, and you will have an advantage towards them, because I met a lot of people who've been in the industry for a long time and they haven't tried ZBrush. And I thought that was an essential skill that you had to have, and they can give you an edge. And also, many programs are similar. If you get, you have to get used to nodes. But if you know one program like Substance Designer, you're gonna have a much easier time understanding World Machine or the shader graph in Unreal, for example. And I think it's a lot more flexible working with nodes than with layers like in Photoshop. So it's an asset. It takes some time to learn, but when you learn one program, it goes pretty fast. This is Goya. It's made by Quad Spinner. It's a newer program similar to World Machine. This graph might look complicated, but I promise you it's really simple. It's just most of it's the same thing. This is all these things. It's just the same operation done over and over again. And here we have different mountains, and I just combine them. It's the same thing over and over again. And compared to Substance Designer, this is pretty simple. Right. So what's next? Level design, gameplay, games optimization. Right. So in your levels, when you make a level, the QA team is going to go complain to you they can't find their way. This is going to happen if you don't think about level design. There's a really good GGC talk about level design workshop called Block Mesh and Lighting Tips. Everyone should watch it. Everyone who's want to be a special level designer, but also an environment artist. And it goes through a lot of good points on navigation, for example. You can use all this to guide your player. Affordance, a platform, feels like you can jump to it. Denying affordance, of course, walls, bars, everything. Shape, you can have, in leading lines, you can have lines subconsciously pointing towards where you want the player to go. Movement, you can have a piece of cloth moving where you want the people to lead to, and some birds flying away, you will automatically look at that area. Framing composition, breadcrumbs, you can have pickups leading to something, you can have blood trails leading to something, and of course lighting. A big guard ray will absolutely guide you to the right place. And if you can do some of this, if people still getting lost, just do more of this. If you do all of this and they still get lost, then you probably will have to redo this space. Uh, Working with level design, you will need to compromise, and you will need to compromise in both directions. The gameplay comes first. I mean, for you, the art might seem like the most important, but for the company, the gameplay is the most important part. So they have the last word, but still, you know, it's about communication. And also difference from different types of game. If you have a game about exploring or a fantasy game, we do a lot of exploring, then of course the art is going to matter more. If you do a game that's fast-paced shooting or hack and slash, at some point in the game, you're not going to even see the environment. It's going to be too busy with shooting. It's going to be effects all over the screen. You will spend a lot of time doing stuff, and then you won't see it. Remember when we released the gameplay video for Darkborn? You didn't see half my stuff in that one. They just blurred, by, but with the player moving fast, and then you have, it's important to know where you should put your effort in a level. For example, if you have a fast shooting game, at some point the pacing is going to go down. It's going to be a bit calm. The player need to catch their breath, maybe collect some things, and in those times, that's where you put the most effort in the art. Those are the areas where you dress or make a cool reveal or an epic view or something. Because before it's a waste basically. You can make a generic place where the combat is, and then save the art for later. So, and in those areas with a lot of combat, it's good enough, and then move on, because time is always short in game development. You will never feel that you finished a level. There's always more stuff to move. All right, so what's next? Modeling, sculpting, baking, stuff like that. This is pretty straightforward, I think. But it's also involves planning. And remember what I said just before, like all assets aren't hero props. If it's a small rock or a brick, you don't need to take it into ZBrush and bake it, because, as I said before, no one's going to see it. It's just going to be a detail. And you want to put the effort in the big assets that matter. So time is limited, be smart. Plan your assets. Textures. So I think there's a difference between creating a texture and texturing an object. So basically, texturing an object you do in programs like Substance Painter, and creating textures you do in programs like Substance Designer. And there are different ways of making textures. I think these ones are most relevant today in high-end production. You can do it in ZBrush, Designer, by photogrammetry, and there's also hybrids. If you do it in ZBrush, you get the advantage of having a lot of control. You're sculpting the texture. But it's also a destructive workflow. You can't, if you have to go back and change something, you have to redo the whole assets, do the baking and everything again. Then we have Substance Designer. This is a non-destructive workflow. So it's very easy to go back and change a detail, and then you don't have to redo all the baking and everything. But it's also node-based, so it's a total different workflow than in ZBrush. And then we have photogrammetry. Here you also get the advantage of getting the actual model, Highpoly model. So this is a scan I did in a studio. I just bought a white tent and then put lights on it so we get an even light. And then I spin the objects in 3 rows. And this is the result. This gets quite crisp. And I think I honestly think this is my opinion, but you cannot achieve this quality in textures by Substance Designer. Some of the best ones, they look a little bit stylized. They don't look totally realistic. It's very hard to actually make this in ZBrush or Designer. It's possible. It will just take you a lot of time to sculpt this. I don't know. I don't want to think about how long that would take for me. Then hybrids, of course, you can import sculpted and baked assets from ZBrush, and then, for example, make the color in Substance Designer, which I'm doing here. Then we have the last and maybe most important part. It's art in general. Composition, ideas, color, theory, being able to draw. This is the core of the environment, core part of environment. You basically making a 3D pictures. And to people who aren't involved in the game industry, they ask me what I do. I usually say it's like The Sims. I play stuff, I rotate it, and it's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but that's actually core. You're actually composing a 3D picture or space. You can even control what you want the player to see. You can have parts of your environment that are very narrow, and then you have to you force the players to get a certain perspective, and then you can compose that like a painting. You will know exactly what the player will see in these kinds of parts of the environment. Then it's about being creative, understanding colors and light. Art direction is an important one. I mean, you will probably have an art director, but being able to analyze different styles and how it's super important to understand how to make them. You have to see the key aspects of an art style in order to make it. Otherwise, it's going to be very hard to get everyone in the team to make exactly the same type of art. And if you're good at drawing, I mean, I spent way too little time just drawing different environments. And this is something as an environment artist that's really good if you just want to get some concept for yourself for the composition, because you will, even at big companies, you won't get concept art for everything. You will have to be creative and come up with your own spaces, and just drawing and practicing that is very important. So, as a student, you need to decide where to focus, and I would suggest focusing on the perhaps more important parts, and maybe less this one, playing games. It is important to understand different games, but I guess most of you have already played as much games as you need to know that. And then maybe not focus on traveling either, even if that's fun. But most of these subjects are something you will learn later on. So focus on the most important subjects for now. And I have some general advices. Be thirsty for knowledge. You will never stop learning. The more you explore different fields and so on, the better an artist you will be. Remember also, when you start the work, as I said, I was surprised I got my first job because I thought my portfolio was really bad. But the journey doesn't end when you get a job, it starts when you get a job. So remember that it's going to be scary the first time you're in a work environment and people have expectations. But just remember, you're not going to be an expert at that time. So just take the time you need to develop. And even after a year, you're not going to be an expert. Even after 2 years, you're not going to be an expert on most things. So just experiment, learn new programs. There's a lot of material out there, a lot of tutorials, free ones, some not free, but look up the end result of the tutorial, look up who the artist is, and invest. I mean, there are some tutorials that teach you everything from start to finish to making a really cool hero prop, and it's like 17 hours, and it costs 300 crowns, and that's a no-brainer. Invest in that one if the artist is really good. I think you all should take the life drawing course here. I mean, it's Pernilla, and she worked at Disney, and that's rare. Even if it's pretty far from an environment art, that's a really good course. And enjoy Visby. Walk around, look at the nature and architecture, materials, and so on. Right. So I will be doing some portfolio reviews tomorrow. I won't be at Rindy because I had other plans planned months ago. So yeah, now is the time if you want to ask me something. And it could be anything about the industry or 3D. It doesn't have to be about the presentation. Right. I need a mic here, I think.
Wait.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I was just wondering, how much learning do you think you can do at your first job, or are you expected to know every step of the way, or can you go to look at tutorials to solve problems?
Yeah, I think you're expected to do a lot of learning at your first job. People won't expect you to be perfect, not even at the big companies. As I said, I was ashamed of my portfolio, and I asked them a few months ago, like, why did you hire me now when I was safe in the position? And they said, we thought your portfolio was really good, a lot above average. So, and they have certain expectations of you if you're coming directly from school. They're not going to expect you to be a master sculptor in ZBrush. And I mean, and I'm also meeting people in the industry that have worked for a long time, and they don't know anything. 10, 15 years. And I said, like, some people I worked for 10 years don't know ZBrush because that wasn't part of the workflow back then. So, yeah.
If I may follow up, what did your portfolio look like? What did it contain?
It looks the same as it looks now, basically. I've added maybe 2 things because I can't show what I did do at work for the most part. I guess this talk is gonna go up on the portal, and you have my ArtStation link, so you can just the last 2 things there, I think, is after I got employed, and then the rest is before. Yeah. Any more questions up there? Oh, yeah.
From a leading artist, what are the most important directions you get as an environmental artist?
From my lead artist?
Yeah.
The most important directives I get is don't focus too much on making stuff beautiful that no one's going to see. That's absolutely the most, because time is short. Don't spend too much. You're going to get stuck. You're going to make something super beautiful, and then it's just going to be a small detail in the environment, and then just get it good enough, and then move on. I think that's one of the most important.
Okay.
More questions?
Thank you for your talk. What made you switch from 2D to 3D?
I don't know. Pernilla, Natashka at the time was our 3D teacher, and he showed me a speed level design video, and I thought that looks easy, but it wasn't. But I got hooked. I liked the 3D space, maybe to make not just a painting where you can look from one direction, but something you can actually walk around in and be in. And that made me switch to 3D. Also, I like the aspect of it being both art and technical. So you can actually rely on some parts. If you lack the skill in art, you can have some backup from tech and the other way around. So I like the combination of the technical and artist stuff. Did that answer your question? Any more? Anyone?
Thank you for your talk. How much time, I am always fascinated with the texture artist aspect, how much time do you spend just running around gathering textures, or to what extent do you work with just an environment bank? Do you have a...
Depends on what style. If you're doing a stylized game, obviously you have to you can't just often not just buy textures. There are some on asset store, and most games actually utilize asset store. But in Darkbone we used a lot of Megascan assets, photogrammetry. So we tweak them basically, and so it differs from game to game. Of course, it's more fun to make all the textures yourself, but as I said before, you have to be time efficient. So if you can buy something, you do that instead of doing it yourself. Especially the environment art is about the big picture. It's not about how much effort and how beautiful you can make a certain texture. It's the whole picture. It's this lighting and the mood and the composition. So don't get stuck on details, even if it's fun, but save that for the hero prop.
Thank you.
How do you feel good enough when you're doing something? How do you feel like this is good enough and not just get stuck on this isn't good enough?
It's when my art director tells me it's shit, redo it, and then we have an argument, and then I go and redo it. That's a good question. I mean, it's actually up to are you meaning now as a student or in production?
Both.
As a student, I would look at games and see how the environment, what level they are in an art station. But also remember, art station, for example, it's people with a lot of experience, and it's the best people in the world, and it's their select few assets they've made, which they're most proud of in 10 years. So if you're going to compare yourself to that, you have to remember that, as I said, all assets in a game doesn't look like that. But I think it's a good, depends on if you want to work on a mobile game, you won't have the same level of technical same level of technical skills required to make some assets in this quality with baking and ZBrush and stuff. So it's a difficult question. I would say look at something in ArtStation and try to reach that. If you don't reach that completely, that's okay. So just do your best, and as I said, you will be surprised by. You will always think your portfolio is bad, and you will be surprised that it's probably good enough if you put in the efforts and hours.
Thank you.
Thank you for your talk. I was just wondering, in a way, like when getting the first job, how much of your what you've learned came from this education versus your personal one? Because from what I see right now, there is not so much focus on environment design in here as is on character design, for example.
Yeah. That's a good question, actually. And if I would try and put it in numbers, when I applied for the job, about 10% of my knowledge was from school and 90% from doing stuff outside of school. This is education based on with game design as its main subject, and you will have to do stuff outside of school. If you just do the courses, it's going to be hard to get a job. If you do put in the hours outside, you're gonna get a job for sure. If you put in enough hours, then yeah, it's gonna give results. But think of the knowledge from school as the base, and then you have to expand on that yourself. And you will have the time to do it here in Gotland in this education. You have time to explore on your own. I guess if the education is the same as when I went here, you have some time. And to explain more, that's gonna. I think that's an important skill to learn how to gain knowledge by yourself, because you're gonna have to do that while working in the game industry also. So yeah, you always have to do that. Right? Any more questions? I don't know how we're doing on time. I have no idea. All right.